Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's TOC podcast. I'm Joe Weichert, chair of O'Reilly's Tools of Change conference. If you want to see all the upcoming TOC products and events we have in the works, be sure to visit us at o'reilly.com/TOC. I'm joined today by Neal Hoskins, the founder of WingedChariot. If you're not familiar with WingedChariot, they're an independent publisher of children's books, but they've also produced a number of children's book apps, and that's what we want to focus on today. I should also mention that Neal is part of the team that produces our TOC event at the Bologna Children's Book Fair. And by the way, that event is scheduled for March 18th. We're moving to a larger venue this year, but we anticipate selling out just like we did last year. So be sure to register now at tocbologna.com. Neal Hoskins, welcome to this TOC podcast.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing good, Neal. So thinking back to TOC Bologna 2010, when I walked through the expo hall last year, I was surprised at the almost complete lack of digital devices. And it might as well have been 1995, as every booth was filled with books but no gadgets. So are children's book publishers still on the digital fence?
On the fence. Well, it's a lot harder work, I think, for children's book publishers. What we've seen, and we saw it even in 2008. You were saying it seems like it's 1995. It was still the same in 2008. Color arrived very late to the digital domain, and children's books are full of color. So it wasn't really until the arrival of something like the iPod Touch in 2007-8 that you could really get something on a screen that would actually replicate a lot of children's book content. And also, formats and size and the actual nature of the multimedia-like content that you have in children's books means that it's more difficult to do that process. The ease of use with EPUB and the ease of use with text-based books means that transformation could take place, I would say, a year to 18 months ahead of children's books. But I think the hold-up has not necessarily just been the publishers; it's been the devices and the actual technology itself. It's been not that long really, and it's a difficult task. I think what we've seen in our work in working with other publishing partners is it's a whole new world, and there's a lot to learn. And I would say, and this is kind of surprising, I think, for me to say, if you compare the experience even now today on a latest, take for example the iPad, compared to a large format picture book for young children where we work specifically, the book, I would say the large picture book, may often as an experience still win out because of the size of the content. So an iPad screen is still 9.7 inches, and to get a lot of content in there with book-like content that you see from publishers is hard, and you can't digitize that because the experience falls behind, I think, the large paper format book for let's say 3 to 10-year-olds to read. So there are a lot of factors in there which I think have kept the on-the-fence crowd on the fence and have allowed some sort of pioneers and some people to experiment, but I don't think there's a format that's won out or a drive towards lots of content going onto devices like you found in the last, let's say, year with the Kindle, with the iPad, and with things like iBooks, where there's a huge amount of content can be driven into one platform. So it's still open, I think.
So let's go back. That's a really interesting point about the screen size. I mean, surely the solution is not to have a larger device, because if anything, it seems like the devices are probably getting smaller. So do publishers just have to figure out how to maximize the real estate that they're going to have access to?
Yeah, I think, and that's a really difficult question because it depends on what you do with your current content. Do you invest in that? Do you repurpose it? Do you strip out some of the characters? You have a lot of characters in children's book publishing, some very well-known brand characters that people would like to buy on their new devices that the end readers and the end users are looking for. So, but you might have to rewrap that totally, take out parts, throw out some, bring in other parts, and that repurposing, it doesn't scale well in terms of resources, so it might have to be bespoke projects. It might have to be working with some of the large media store owners, you know, the Apples, the Microsofts, the Googles of the world, to see how you would do that. And I think that takes time, and it takes editorial input. It takes management risk in the larger jobs where they will take that risk. And a lot of companies, given the current economic circumstances in many countries, aren't willing to take those risks until they see bigger returns. So, you know, a lot of it, I understand completely why there's not been a sort of rush to convert lots of children's book digital content into applications, because it's tricky still. It's tricky, and it's still evolving.
Although, you know, what's interesting to me is when I look at the bestsellers on the iPad platform, certainly in the book section, it seems to be children's books. And then even when I look at general apps, a lot of the apps are aimed at kids. So that seems to be a really a hotbed here of competition for digital content for kids, right?
Yeah, I think one of your colleagues, Pete Myers, did some research about what apps people use, and I think in a kind of family-based context, children's book story apps did sort of come out on the radar as one of the sort of genres of apps that are used more often than once, and people go back to. So you have, if we're talking just in the Apple flavors at the moment, you have a kind of slight odd world where you have the children's book apps in the App Store, which children's book publishers in some ways have flocked to a little, because it allows them, by doing pure apps, it allows them the play and the ingenuity of children's books to be replicated in digital through learning and playing with content. But you also have a large bookstore, for example, within the iBook store, that is now accepting fixed frame EPUB files for color and mixed media content. And those two, I don't think Apple have helped in this. They've guided a lot of publishers into iBooks to do, say, well, EPUB is somewhat simpler and less costly, and doesn't involve having to, you know, build up teams of code and developers. So you go there. But a lot of the publishers who enjoy and like the editorial and creativity of apps have, you know, gone towards the application development, and have actually morphed their businesses into more of sort of digital application makers for learning and play. So you've got a slight imbalance and a slight confusion on the Apple platform, I think, where to go, and that you know, that sort of question between EPUB or single applications is still being sort of you know, contested and thought through and argued amongst children's publishers, because you know, the scales and costs of both are different, but the returns and the direction, I think, is always towards the applications and towards the more, let's say, the more open digital experiences of children's stories, rather than a book-like experience on the iBook store.
So let's talk about it, since you brought it up, the whole comparison of going EPUB, which is going to be a lot more portable on different devices and platforms, versus, say, creating a native app on a particular platform. Which do you think is going to win out in the long run?
I don't think you can say at the moment. I don't think there'll be a winner out. I think that certain things will come out on certain formats. I think where you're wanting to do a series and a lot of content through scale, you'll probably use the bookstore or EPUB format. Where you're wanting to push the edge a bit, push the envelope to a rather different mixed experience of maybe learning, play, gameplay, and reading, then I think, because of the tools that publishers have to play with and have to learn to use, the application tools are far stronger. Even if we were to get into the, you know, the sort of haloed HTML5 and all of those discussions, every developer and everyone you speak to, there are certain things for certain medias, and you know, if you really want to do some really cool stuff, you're going to have to use native code, whatever. If you really want to push the envelope in terms of making something that's a reading experience but with a lot of play and a lot of input, you're going to go down the application route. If you want to at the moment, and I think that's what a lot of publishers have to think about. And if you're wanting to sort of use your current content and make it available to your digital customers, then you're probably going to push it through into the EPUB, into these large stores where people get a familiar experience and are reminded of a book when they use when they use an iBook like application.
And I think that sums up sort of the state of the industry at this point. But I'd like to think before too long, even EPUB functionality is going to give access to the sensors and the cameras and all the other pieces of the mobile device there. Today, you're right. You're basically limited to developing on a native application on that platform in order to really take advantage of all those sensors and so forth. But I'd like to think that down the road we'll have a lot more power on the EPUB side and not have to just go with an iOS version and then having to port that and create an Android version and so forth. Do you think that's likely?
I think you see a lot of emerging formats and technologies within these digital stores, and it's just a matter of time before some platforms perhaps will, or technologies used in those platforms will win out. I remember talking to it's Liza Daly, isn't it?
Yes.
One of your new employees, and she was showing me some stuff that I think that the last TOC event in New York that you could do on iBooks, of moving content around and actually using the accelerometer even within there. And she said, well, Apple didn't even know they had this within there. It was kind of they were so versed in getting this platform up and getting the content in, they hadn't really looked into where it could go. So I'm sure there are some avenues that will be explored down there, because we are seeing web-like technologies that they are bounded around at the moment. CSS3 and HTML5, these are solutions. They are sort of solutions. They're not quite there yet. They're still a long way off. But you can see games being made now on HTML5 platform, and rich content produced by this. And that will further along. That will go ahead, and that will become scripts and features that people will use. But we like everything in digital publishing, it is evolving quickly, and it is evolving, before our eyes. So we'll have to see, what the year brings.
So let's shift gears for a moment here and talk about your company, WingedChariot. Tell us what you and your team are up to and why your apps are special.
Well, we come from an educational development background. A lot of us worked or still work for Oxford University Press. And we used to build language materials for people to learn English and other languages. So when we came to look at what digital would mean to us, we first were looking at languages. We always wanted to do something with multilingual, and we saw the ability within digital applications to actually create multilingual layers and files. And that was our one basic it really drove our digital development in the first 6 months. We wanted just to learn that. We wanted to do it ourselves because we thought we should learn this, we should know how to do it. We wanted to have people in-house doing it. So we took kind of slow route, but very early. And that has really defined us, and it still does. I mean, our latest application that we did, called My House, is really a true bilingual application in French and English, where you can switch out at any part in the story between those two languages just by touching the screen. And it really features as a word learning application, really, to learn words with beautiful artwork and great storytelling. Because that was the other thing on digital. We didn't want to lose sight of just being publishers of great stories. We wanted rich, real artist content mixed with, inspired by the technology that was around. We've done some work with artists where we've converted their content and taken aspects of their content into digital, and we've done digital originals with some artists where we've said, this is the iPad screen that we want to develop on, this is the sizes, and they've made artwork for it. In terms of our what we're doing and where we're going. I think our educational side, we've been involved in a lot of research this year in schools, looking at how kids use, learn, and what they think about digital devices and digital content that they can use in their class lessons and their home lessons. And we're quite fascinated by that area. That's not necessarily a direct commercial area. A lot of our business, what we do is in research and in educational theory. And what we've seen a kind of whole new release where it's given us much freedom to work on all the different screens that are available in schools. We are only about the iPad because the iPad is here, but we're as interested in any screen that a parent would have at home or a teacher would have at school. And some of those solutions that we found through using, for example, Unity 3D engines with plugins via a browser are what makes us now. We're looking at solutions to work with content that can be seen on any screen. And I think this year what's very interesting for us is the tie-up of the TVs and the real family screen at home, which is now often a very large screen in the center of a room. And we think there's a great opportunity there for sort of reading and story-like materials, because just the sheer size gives that great pleasure of just playing with beautiful content and stories just as a family experience. And now you've got things, for example, like the Wii and the Xbox. And I think all the games platforms are not going to be just about gaming. They're going to be about entertainment and learning. And your TV will be the screen that produces that. So I think we're very interested in different sorts of screens and the experience that both learners and families can get via stories within that. So we sort of dabble in a few areas, but education is certainly our sort of main focus in the next few years, I would say.
So is the iPad likely to remain the dominant platform for children's apps?
Well, it's way out there, isn't it? It's way out ahead at the moment. I think because of the solution end to end in terms of the content, the devices, the interconnectedness of the devices, I would presume so. It will fuel the interest of children's publishers this year. But I think looking at some of the events that happened, I think it's CES in Las Vegas last week. Some of the announcements. I think you definitely see that in the midterm there are perhaps three platforms that are going to vie, which is Google, Apple, and Microsoft, and all of those companies will make or be involved in making devices, and there'll be devices with numerous screens, be it from your handheld to your laptop, to your TV, to a tablet. And it's really the proliferation of those will be defined by those companies and the arrangements they make with content owners to get that content on those devices. So I think Apple are ahead, but not necessarily the only platform at all for people to develop on. Even if some of their other platforms are not as well known and don't have so many users, because I've seen lots of smaller developers and smaller publisher developers struggle when it comes to investment and return on the larger platforms, just because that ugly old word discoverability comes up, and it's tough out there. Already you're working in a store that's larger than the largest Waterstones ever was in the UK. So you've got to fight for your right to be in there, and getting people to go there, although it's instantaneous, i.e. they can at 2 clicks have your product, you've still got to get them there, and that's hard work. So sometimes opening up and doing some stuff on some new stores, we did what is now perhaps some work that might fade away, because we work with HP and WebOS on doing some applications, but we saw some very impressive Christmas sales over this period for people who had in the HP WebOS store that you would imagine was not so popular anymore, but there are still quite a lot of devices around there and people looking to buy content. So the Apple one, it always shines out there the brightest, but it is a kind of large C and a and a hot seat to be in when you get in there, just to get people to your app. So it's a double-edged sword in some ways.
Well, you brought up one of my favorite topics, and that is discoverability. I just think you're right. It's a huge problem today, excuse me, and I think it's going to be an even bigger problem tomorrow. And I'm, I guess, not too optimistic that that problem is going to be solved anytime soon. I don't know how you feel about it, but last question for you related to that. What changes do you see in the children's app world in the next year, 12 to 18 months, let's say? Will discoverability get better, for example?
Well, I think some of that is actually due to the to the key holders of those stores. I mean, how they make their software, how they make the experience for people to shop within those stores better. They are, I think, still quite antiquated, those experiences and those stores. It's not pleasurable to search within them. So perhaps some work from these technical companies could go down quite well, and Apple actually sorting out some of the things with iTunes and some of the other stores just becoming more pleasurable to explore through. In terms of what will change, I don't know. I mean, we've got lots of great discussions coming up at TOC Bologna about that, in terms of what's going to happen, all the projects that have been done this year between publishers in different sorts of countries, all the big characters that were being brought into it. I think what you'll see is a lot of character work, with main children's characters being brought into digital, and that digital experience being pushed and marketed by larger companies, picking out some very key characters. I think you'll see more people working within the application world where they're comfortable and have formed a relationship with our developers, or they've been tasked by their managers to take departments and to take their content into new roads and experiment with it a bit more. And you may see some new things come up. I mean, there are some new companies working. Perhaps you'll see some companies who I know there are some smaller companies working on some children's devices that are looking for content. What I think you'll see mainly is there's still a great need for publishers' great content, and they hold those rights to that, and they will, I think, be chased a bit more by the people who own these stores to say, hey, come on, we'd like to see that on our store. Let's do something about this, and let's get some things done. And as the tide turned with text-based EPUB and let's say fiction chapter books over the last 12 months, and this Christmas was, I don't know when we'll see the results of Kindle sales in the UK, but I think it's going to be a massive Christmas for them. So I think people accept, of all ages, that I can read quite happily now on a device that does text, and I'm quite happy to have that, and I'll go and buy it, and I'm not averse to paying from £50 to £100 for that device. And when it comes for children's books, those have to have colour screens. That means more expensive devices, but also perhaps you'll get the launch of the Kindle Fire in Europe, as well as the US. They'll be taking that on the road and expanding that, so that will attract children's publishers again. It has a smaller 7-inch, I think, isn't it, colour screen, but that will be an attractive colour device for people to work with. You may see Barnes & Noble bring the Nook. The Nook seems to have been very successful with marketing to children and families as a device in the States, and I think that might be an attractive proposition to bring that out to other countries, because it's gone down very well, especially with, for example, mothers looking for content for their children so they can have it portably in their bag. So maybe you'll see expansions on there, and you'll see more publishers being attracted to these devices and to these shops online that sell this content. And with events and with help that different events can give to publishers, they'll just learn more, and more publishers will come and bring their content into these devices, and I think still experiment, but to a greater extent, just because they may see a slight downturn in their actual physical books trade. I'm not sure with children's book publishing. Again, the hardback picture book, this is what we're involved in, that 3 to 10-year-olds. That's still probably quite a attractive proposition for bookshops to sell, even though as paperbacks and cheaper formats fade, perhaps in the next 3 years, this format perhaps will be pushed back to the fore. Maybe the combination, I think, perhaps would be a combination of printing large format, full color, very rich books together with a digital edition. Maybe that will be the attractive package for children's book publishers to work on. I'm sure there are going to be some of those things discussed in Bologna this March with the with the lineup that we're drawing together at the moment. There's going to be some fantastic discussions and some real case studies from different international publishers with big character names and co-cooperation experiments that they've done that I think have come off really well. So, if there are any children's publishers that are going to listen to this, or people interested in children's publishing in the future, do come along to Bologna. It's going to be a great event there.
Yeah, I would agree. I think last year there were some terrific case studies shared, and I expect there to be even more this year. So, again, for folks listening in, be sure to register for the event on March 18th at tocbologna.com. Neal Hoskins of WingedChariot, I want to thank you again so much for talking to us today on this TOC podcast.
Okay, thanks, Joe.